Welcome to the Wisdom Time YouTube channel. You know, horoscopes, they are everywhere. Magazines, websites, you name it. But what's the real story? Are they some kind of ancient wisdom or just a bit of harmless fun? Well, today we're going to dig into that, looking at what modern science and Islamic scripture have to say about it all.
So let's just jump right in with the big question, right? Does your star sign, the day you were born, the alignment of the stars and all that, does it really define who you are, your personality, your future? It's a question millions of people probably ask themselves every single day.
Okay, so here's what's really fascinating. You might think that science and religion would have totally different things to say about this, right? But what's so interesting is that when you actually look at the sources, I'm talking scientific journals on one hand and religious texts on the other, the answer is, well, it's pretty much the same, and it's super direct. The consensus is a resounding no. Your birth date just doesn't have an effect on your personality. So the big question is, why? Why is there such a strong agreement here? To get to the bottom of that, we've got to unpack it. Let's start with the scientific verdict. And to really do that, we need to be clear about what we're even talking about when we look up at the sky. So you've got two very different ways of looking at the sky. On one side, you have astrology. This is all about ancient beliefs, these hypothetical shapes we call constellations, and the idea that they somehow influence our personalities and our futures. But then on the other side, you have astronomy. That's a whole different ballgame. It's about the scientific method, looking at observable facts, what these stars are actually made of, how they move, how they relate to each other in, physical space. And this gets to a really fundamental problem. Those constellations that make up the zodiac, they aren't real groups of stars. Think of it like a giant game of connect the dots in the sky. From our viewpoint here on Earth, they make a pretty picture, like a lion or a bull. But in reality, the stars in, say, Leo, are millions and millions of kilometers apart from each other. Some of them might actually be physically closer to a star in a totally different constellation. And get this, because the Earth has this tiny wobble in its axis over thousands of years, the sky has actually shifted. So the star sign dates we use today, they don't even line up with the constellations they were named for anymore. So when you know all that, it's probably not a huge shock to hear what happens when scientists actually put astrology to the test. And they really have. We're talking about thousands of studies with huge numbers of people, all trying to find any kind of link between someone's birth date and their personality. The result? Every single time? Nothing. Zero correlation. Zilch. Now, there is one tiny little statistical link that's ever been found, and it's this. A few studies suggest that if you're born in the winter, you might have a slightly higher tendency toward depression compared to people born in the spring or summer. But, and this is a huge but, notice what's going on here. This is a seasonal thing. It's probably tied to environmental stuff like how much sunlight your mom got. It has absolutely nothing to do with whether the sun was passing through Sagittarius or Capricorn. Okay, so that's the science. Now let's switch gears completely. Let's look at this from a theological angle, specifically what the Qur'an has to say. Do the scriptures give a green light to reading our fate in the stars? The Qur'an definitely talks about stars and constellations a lot, but what's key is that it also explains why. Take this verse, for instance. It's super direct. It says the stars are there so you can find your way in the dark, on land, and at sea. I mean, for thousands of years, that's exactly what they were. They were humanity's original GPS. And you see this same idea pop up again and again throughout the text. Stars are for navigation, for keeping track of time, for knowing the seasons. And, as these beautiful signs of God's creation, their purpose is always presented as something practical, something awe-inspiring, but never as a tool for telling the future. Okay, but you might be thinking, hang on, what about a verse like this one? The Quran literally swears an oath by the constellations. Doesn't that mean they're super important for, figuring out our lives? That's a great question, but the sources give us a really helpful way to think about it. The Quran also swears by the fig and the olive, but nobody's running around trying to tell their fortune with a fig, right? It's a way of speaking, a rhetorical device. It's meant to make you stop and think about how amazing that part of creation is, not to say it holds some secret mystical power to predict the future. And actually, it goes even further than that. The teachings of the Prophet Muhammad are incredibly clear and really strong on this point. This hadith, for example, is pretty stark. It says that believing a fortune teller isn't just a small mistake, it's something that fundamentally goes against the very core of the faith. All right, so we've heard from science and we've heard from scripture, and they seem pretty aligned. So what are the counter-arguments? What do people say to defend horoscopes? Let's tackle some of the most common ones. Yeah, there are two big ones you hear a lot. First, people will say, hey, what about famous scholars from history, like Ibn Sīnā? He was a genius, and he wrote about astrology. And the second thing you'll hear are these stories about how wise men used the stars to predict the birth of the Prophet Muhammad. So do these points actually hold up? Let's take them one by one. First, the thing about the famous scholars. Look, Ibn Sīnā was absolutely brilliant, no question. But he was also a man of his time, using the science of his time. We can respect his incredible intellect while also acknowledging that the model of the universe he was working with has since been proven wrong. As for the second point, the stories about predicting the prophet's birth, well, scholars who are experts in this stuff have looked into them, and the verdict is that they're either completely made up or, at the very least, come from super unreliable sources. Okay, so the science is shaky and the religious texts aren't on board. So why do horoscopes sometimes feel so creepily accurate? Come on, we've all been there. You read your horoscope and think, whoa, that is so me. What's going on there? Well, the answer isn't in the stars, it's in our heads. It's all about psychology. Think about a statement like this one for a second. You can be a very emotional person, but you often have a hard time showing it. Now, be honest. Who does that not describe? That's pretty much everyone, right? This is the classic trick of horoscope language. It's just vague enough, just flattering enough, that it applies to almost anybody. And this has a name. It's a real psychological thing called the Barnum effect. You know, named after the circus guy, P.T. Barnum, who said his show had a little something for everybody. That's exactly what's happening here. Our brains are wired to find patterns. So when we read a really general statement, we unconsciously start filling in the blanks with our own personal experiences, and suddenly, bam, it feels like it was written just for us. So if we decide to maybe not look to the stars for answers about ourselves, does that mean the whole journey of self-discovery is over? No way, not at all. It just means we might need to look in a different direction. We're going to get to some of those better paths in just a second. But first, hey, if you're finding this explainer useful, it would be awesome if you hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. All right, so for anyone who is genuinely curious about what makes you, you, psychology has some much more grounded tools. Things like the Big Five personality traits, or the Myers-Briggs, or the Enneagram. Look, none of them are perfect, but they give you a real framework to start understanding yourself, based on actual inquiry, not on ancient star maps. And that really brings us to the final thought to leave you with. When it comes to that huge, important journey of knowing yourself, all the sources we've looked at today seem to point to one big question. To truly understand who you are, should you be looking up at imaginary patterns in the sky, or should you be looking inward, using the best tools of reason and knowledge that we have today?